So the question is, if a big solar flare or EMP was to hit, what would it do to the hundreds and hundreds of nuclear reactors? And you want to talk about a detailed report. I mean, it's long, but it's a quick read with maps, documents, cases where reactors have already had trouble that I didn't even know about, but went and looked up. It's true. It's 400 Chernobyl, solar flares, EMPs, and nuclear Armageddon by Matthew Stein. And going over his bio here, Matthew Stein is a design engineer, green builder. Again, I'm all for green building. I'm just against paying carbon taxes to foreign banks. And author of 2 best-selling books, When Disaster Strikes, A Comprehensive Guide to Emergency Planning and Crisis. Excellent book. I've read it. Put out in 2011. And When Technology Fails, A Manual for Self-Reliance. I haven't read that yet, but I ordered it. Sustainability and Surviving the Long Emergency. And again, I'm for real sustainability, not the counterfeit that means build 3 coal plants in China a week and we don't get to have any. We're just, or shut off our oil and ship it all to China and block new alternative energies from being developed. See, it's about a monopoly, but I'm digressing. Stein is a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he majored in mechanical engineering. Stein has appeared on every show you can imagine, and he's also a guest columnist for the Huffington Post. And he joins us to go over what real threats are, because they've got these hot dog people. Fox News took our headline and said, Homeland Security hires wiener watchers, the hot dog vendors, acting like everybody's a terrorist. You got a better chance being killed by champagne corks, honeybees, or deer jumping out in front of you. Look up the statistics. We've gone over them here. So what are the real threats? What are the real threats? And this is a real one. We've only had, nuclear power engineering on a mass scale the last 30, 40 years. And we've had it for 60, 70 in submarines, but I guess the first one was the Nautilus or whatever. But now it's proliferating, and now they've got the greenies pushing neighborhood reactors. Oh, that's another wonderful idea. So we've got him with us for the rest of the hour. And then we have another guest joining us, Lawrence Lessig, and he's an expert on the attack on free speech and the internet and how Congress has been corrupted. But good to have you with us, Mr. Stein. We appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate your article. But please, break down as best you can what you put in this big paper. Okay.
Well, here it is. You're genuine. This is a real threat. This is like a guaranteed Armageddon. This is an event that we haven't seen on this planet since 65 million years ago, when an asteroid hit, or who knows what exactly happened, but something wiped out all the dinosaurs in a short period of time. And this is a totally avoidable event. So here's the situation. Solar storms hit our planet fairly often. We've had, in the last 150 years, we've had about 100 significant storms. We had one a week ago where they had to reroute some Delta flights over the North Pole because of the ionizing radiation. This is basically when the sun burps, it gives like a huge mass called a coronal mass ejection when stuff from the sun gets launched out into space. Now, this happens all the time, solar minimums, solar maximums, but most of the time it's not aimed towards our planet. So it just goes off into space, no big deal. Now and then it hits our planet. Well, now and then it hits our planet really, really big. So back in 1921, there was a solar storm where it lit up the sky, blood, orange, green, yellow streaks, all kinds of things, all the way from the North Pole down to Puerto Rico and Haiti, and all the way from the South Pole to Samoa. So every place on the planet got this incredible light show, except for a narrow band around the equator. Now, back then when it happened, it was like no big deal. Nobody, very few, maybe a few people died. Some telegraph stations burned down. Penn Central Station burned down from induced currents that started fires. But there were no nuclear power plants. There was no microelectronics. There was no giant power grid. Well, fast forward to today. If we had a storm like the 1921 one, that was 90 years ago, and before that, the next extreme one before that was in 1859 called the Carrington event. Similar light show, only it went on for an entire week. There was 2 giant CMEs spaced 5 days apart. One blasted, and then a few days later, another one blasted out of the sun. It hit the planet Earth, and so the first one kind of got the magnetosphere spinning and all the electronic interactions going on the planet kind of revved up, like revving up an engine. And then the second one hit a few days later and revved it up to high gear. So if either of those happened today, we've got over 100,000 miles of high voltage, extra high voltage power lines uniting the grid in the United States alone, over 100,000 miles. So these power lines are going to act like a giant antenna, and they're going to take this energy from space that's been induced from these charged particles hitting our upper atmosphere, and they're going to suck it up. And when they do, they're going to send thousands of volts and amps down these lines, and there's transformers called extra high voltage transformers that they started putting into our grid in the late 60s, mostly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They upgraded the grid in North America. And what happens is when this grid gets zapped by all of this energy from outer space, then it's like the grid is operating on synchronized, it's 60 volts, 60 cycles, like all of our lights, everything's going at 60 cycles.
It's going to totally fry everything and blow them out. As you said, you've got photos and news reports. When the power lines, last time this happened, lit up red and melted. Or I guess those were just telegraph lines. What is this going to do? Yeah, this is going to be wild.
This is going to blow the transformers. And when it does, now people say, well, can't you just go down, to the hardware store and buy a new transformer? Well, these transformers are like 300 tons each, and they're multi-million dollars, and they're all custom designed and custom built. So it takes 3 years now to buy a single transformer. Now, in 1989, we had a big geomagnetic storm, 1/10 the size of the 1921 storm, which was supposedly 50% less than the 1859. So 1989, we have a big storm, way bigger than the one we had a week ago, way bigger. And that fried a transformer in Quebec, knocked out power to 9 million people for something like 6 hours. It also fried a transformer in the East Coast, and it fried a transformer in the UK. But this was only 2 in North America, and it almost caused a cascading failure. Well, the 1921 one, the science modeling says it's going to fry and cook 350 or more of these transformers in the United States, 2,000 worldwide. Well, in the whole world, we make about 100 of these a year. So if we get 2,000 worldwide, that's like 20 years of production. Now, all of a sudden, grid down, grid collapse.
It's taken 100 years to build this grid up to where it is, and if it's anywhere near, like you're saying, the one that hit over 100 years ago, this would be devastating. Do we have any actuaries or ideas on how much would get knocked out?
Yeah, we're talking 350 in North America, 2,000 in the world for the 1921 storm. That's what the Meditech study, it was Sandia National Labs, Oak Ridge National Labs. Wow. They all checked it. So this is a big study. And this has been checked and verified.
So they know this, and they're just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
Well, here's the thing. They've put bills since 2008. They've had 2 different bills in Congress, and they've narrowly avoided passing it. The latest one's called the SHIELD Act. But the SHIELD Act is still kind of silly. It's like the SHIELD Act says, well, we're not going to do anything. We're the government, but we're going to make the utilities do something, spend a couple $2 billion to fix this problem. And then if they don't like it, then they can appeal to us and get some financial help. But the problem is the utilities are saying, we don't want to spend it, so they're fighting it.
Stay there. Amazing. Amazing, sir. This is so important. We'll be right back after this quick break. This couldn't be more important.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done has been right.
We'll take a few calls if you have specific questions for our guest, Matthew Stein, author of When Disaster Strikes and When Technology Fails, best-selling author, MIT design engineer and builder, obviously, as well as a writer. And whentechnologyfails.com is one of the websites you can visit. It's excellent. He put out this big report, 400 Chernobyls, solar flare, EMP, and nuclear Armageddon, because it's bad enough to have years of power outages and problems and infrastructure damage, but getting into the reactors, this is a short segment, long segment coming up, Mr. Stein, but obviously it's the reactors are one of the biggest threats, correct?
Yeah, the reactors are the end of the world as we know it problem, and this is the one where it's a no-brainer we could solve this problem. I mean, there's no way to protect against all the bad effects of an EMP or a solar storm, but we can protect against nuclear Armageddon. Now, here's the ticket with nuclear power plants. When Fukushima blew up and melted down, It wasn't, at least according to Japanese authorities, it wasn't the direct effects of the large 9.0 earthquake. It was the after effect of the tsunami. And I'll explain. When every nuclear power plant has to keep its core cooled or it's going to melt down. You're generating like millions and millions of BTUs instantly in the power core, and that heat is used to generate all the power and the electricity out of steam generators. Well, if you stop running the fluid through that core, all that extra heat's going to go somewhere. It's going to melt the core down and blow the reactor. So when Fukushima blew, after the tsunamis came in and wiped out the backup generators. See, whenever the grid goes down, every nuclear reactor goes into automatic shutdown mode, where the reactor fuel rods and the control rods mesh together and start cooling it down. But there's so much heat in there, and the reactor doesn't stop like flipping a switch, so you got to keep that cooled for the next 3 to 5 years. You got to cool reactor rods after you start shutting them down. So what happened then is earthquake hit, reactor cut off from the grid went down, grid failed, reactor goes into shutdown mode, the backup generators kick on, the backup batteries kick in, and they keep the cooling pumps going. Well, 20 minutes later, the tsunami comes along, wipes out the cooling pumps. A couple hours later, you're going snap, crackle, pop. You're melting down the cores, and you're dissociating water into hydrogen and oxygen, making explosive gases, blowing the containment vessel, and we all saw what happened. Now, fast forward, we get a big, giant solar storm, and not like the little one, not like the big one. We get an extreme one. Big one, 1989, caused problems. Big one, 2003, fried 14 transformers in South Africa, screwed up the grid for an entire year, rolling blackouts to the whole country for a year, for only 14 transformers gone. Fast forward, we get one like 1921. We got a solar maximum coming up, end of 2012, beginning of 2013. We get one like 1921. They're really worried. Signs are looking like we might have a big one like that. All of a sudden, grids totally collapse, down for years in places, some places back short term. But where the dense population is, that's where the nuclear reactors are. That's where the grid collapses, where it's dense. That's where it collapses. Now, all of a sudden, you got chaos. Nobody's getting food. Nobody's getting gas. No pumps to pump. No fuel refined in the refineries. Everything down over most of the industrialized parts of the planet, except for the deep tropical zones that disconnected from other parts of the grid. Suddenly, the government promises that they're going to show up at these reactors with diesel fuel like clockwork to make sure they're all working. All 104 reactors in America. We got 1/3, more than 1/3, 37% of all Americans live within 50 miles of a nuclear reactor.
Whoa, let me stop you. I see where you're going. They're built on our coastlines. 70+% of our population's on the coast. The feds can't show up to bring water a week and a half in at Katrina. They can never help. They can't put out fires in Texas. All the feds do is show up and tell the locals to go under their command and then screw it up. There's no way the feds a couple weeks into this, they're going to be gone, and those things are going to start blowing.
They're going to start blowing. Now, chances are that the solar storm will not screw up electronics on a small scale. It'll just fry the grid. So chances are that most of those backup power systems will work. But they're only mandated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to store 1 week's worth of fuel on hand. So when you go out and see this most incredible light show of your life at night, and you say, man, I can't believe this, you got to see this, this is incredible, it goes on for a night, maybe 2, maybe a week, start the clock running. You got about a week before nuclear Armageddon, unless we fix the problem, and we can fix it.
By the way, you're a serious guy, but I've done my own research. What you're saying is accurate. And this is not hype, and I can tell you're concerned. I'm concerned too, and I make it my job to research this stuff. I've read it over the years, but never really consciously thought about this problem. Let's talk about it more when we get back. This is unbelievable. But going back to our guest, I read his paper, and I was like, wow, I've seen stuff on the news, pieces of this where they admit it. And then I saw the study he was talking about where even the U.S. government admits this is a serious danger. And it's not like it's a possibility. They know someday, it might be 200 years, it might be next week, but they know the sun's going into one of these wild, 100-year phases. It has like 10-year, 12-year phases. The point is, I've had sun, experts on. I've had the physicists and the astrophysicist on, the meteorologists who have degrees in this on top of it, who say the sun's getting ready to go wild. And they know this is real. They know it messes up satellites, everything. And they know it's heated up lines that people were hanging their clothes on. The telegraph wires were heating up red hot. Some of the early light systems were blowing up. So if a big one hits, and but what's scary, going back to our guest, is Homer Simpson is sitting at the helm of a lot of these. We're seeing all these disasters. Let me ask your view on this, because I can't figure it out. Why do you think, Matthew Stein, why do you think there's so many more nuclear disasters now? Is it we just have better reporting, or these are aging systems? Why do you think we're seeing so many problems already?
Well, I think a big part is aging systems. The high level of radioactivity is really tough on metals. I mean, it takes very special alloys to make the steel inside of these things. And these things were originally planned for 20-year lives, and now we're boosting 40, 50 years in some of them. So essentially, we're just still, they're not building many new plants in this part of the world, though they've got a couple hundred in plans for other parts of the world. And so this stuff, when it ages, they don't know what to do with it. There's no place to put all the stuff. And that's a big scary part, is that each reactor has something called spent fuel ponds. Any reactor has been around a while.
Fukushima had 645,000 of them, and they blew for miles around.
Yeah, see, they had a spent fuel pond typically has more than 10 years worth of reactor cores, old reactor cores stored under 20 feet of water. Now, when you cut out the power, in between a few minutes to a few hours, the reactor core will melt down and start blowing its stuff. When you cut out the power to cooling the spent fuel ponds, depending on how recently they decommissioned the core, like if they just unloaded a reactor core, it's super hot, and it'll boil out that 24 feet of water covering those fuel rods in between 4 and 22 days. So basically, when the pumps stop, within a few hours, you're blowing the reactor cores, but they're contained in giant, massive steel containment vessels. Then right next door, they got this pond that basically is inside of a standard industrial tilt-up building with a corrugated steel roof, and they got 10 years worth, like over 10 cores in there in that pond. And in a few days, without cooling pumps, the pond will be boiling down, boiling down, boiling down. In Fukushima, if it wasn't for the heroic actions on the part of the workers who flew over in helicopters and got guns out, and these guys are going to die really early deaths.
A lot of them have already started to die, but they always say they die of something else. The Fukushima 50.
Right. So these guys, if they hadn't refilled that pond, you would have seen 10 Chernobyls going off into the atmosphere right there in Fukushima. Those guys gave their lives to save us from 10 Chernobyls. See, Fukushima officially has dumped half the radiation of Chernobyl, but almost all of that into the ocean, not the atmosphere. But unofficially, people say it might be 2 to 5 times as much as Chernobyl, but again into the ocean. But if that cooling pond had blown, we would have seen 10 Chernobyls worth burning directly into the atmosphere and spreading around the planet.
You know what's freaking me out? We have best-selling author and MIT design engineer, green builder, you name it, joining us here. WhenTechFails.com is the website. What's freaking me out is I've done all this research, and everything he's saying and more is documented. And I was just reading in Japanese news last week that they're not even taking very good care of the Fukushima 50 and their families. It's this society now where the bureaucrats think that they're magic and have magical thinking, and the corporations do, and just say everything's going to be all right when it's not all right, and radiation levels go up. So I'm sure, as you know, Mr. Stein, they've just raised the level worldwide, not just here, to just say it's safe. And as you pointed out, right, rotting 20, 30, 40, and 50-year-old reactors. Fukushima was like, what, 39 years old, had 3 decades of waste. They weren't even shipping it out. They're storing it there. These companies don't care.
There's no place to ship it to. Nobody wants it. There's no place to ship it to. They store it on site all over the world. Now, here's the thing.
So what's going to happen? What I'm saying to you, though, is it all rots. What is the nuclear power industry going to do as these things start blowing up and melting down everywhere now on almost a weekly basis? I guess they're going to just say radiation's good for us because that's the new official policy.
Nah, they're just gonna say, I'm sorry, we didn't know. You know, why doesn't somebody make a permanent repository for all of this stuff? And then, you know, where do they put? You got a decommissioned nuclear reactor. What do? They encased it in concrete, in a big concrete sarcophagus at Chernobyl. You know, at least that's better than what they've done in Fukushima. It's just still sitting there on the top of the earth in Fukushima. I don't know what they're going to do.
Smoking. It's still smoking.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. For about $1 billion, half the price of a stealth bomber, there's new technology, giant vacuum tube technology that can switch so rapidly to protect those massive transformers from grid meltdown. And so for about $1 billion, they could put those in all over the United States to protect our 350, there's like 900 or something of these, or, 800 of these. 350 they protect to blow. They can protect them for about $1 billion. For another $1 billion, they could go to every nuclear facility and mandate that we store a year's worth of fuel and that we have EMP hardened containers on site with backup batteries, backup generators, and backup fuel, so that in the event that stuff gets fried by an EMP or cooked by a solar storm, that at least we prevent nuclear Armageddon. Now, I'm not so naive to think that they were going to just shut down those nuclear power plants instantly. I'd love to see them shut down, but I'm saying, for $1 billion, we could at least protect them in the meantime before we get these new technologies online and can just shut them down for good.
Well, Matthew, I want to talk about the different legislation and how we hopefully get this done. But let me just ask you, because you're obviously a really smart and tuned-in guy. From your research, why do the major corporations and the ruling class obsess all day and trillions of dollars a year to fight terrorism and have spies everywhere, and a new report out, FBI enlists internet cafe owners to spy on customers, when you literally have a better chance of dying from snake bite or wasp or bee sting than from a terrorist? And I know that the big corporations make money off this, and the people that are in security and government rotate and revolving doors into the private companies. I mean, I get they're making money, but
right.
Doesn't the ruling class actually care about stability? Don't they actually care about their own hind ends? Because they're not immune from radiation. Why don't they care?
The thing is that ignorance is bliss. And see, the last major geomagnetic storm happened in 1921. 90 years ago, and it was 60 years before that. So do the math. The average is every 75 years, and the last one's 90 years ago. So we're like overdue. They, looking at ice core samplings, they say roughly every 100 years we get hit by a big daddy solar storm. What we're talking about. Now, the thing is, ignorance is bliss. You get people like Newt Gingrich spouting comments about EMP, which is a huge threat. EMP is a real threat. But the things he says are out and out wrong. He makes statements that every electronic device would just instantly stop in the United States. Wrong. He clearly did not read the report. So if Newt Gingrich, who's, running for president of the United States, acts like he's an expert, but didn't even read the report that I read, I took the time to read it. Why didn't Newt? If he didn't read it, how many of these other guys have read it? These guys are dealing with the 5-minute synopsis that somebody briefed them on, and they just plain don't know.
So their attitude is everything will be fried anyway, so what do we do? But instead, this is actually something that we could prepare for. I
think their attitude is they just don't believe it's that bad. Somebody tells them it's not that bad, and they don't read the real reports, and they just, it's like you said, it's wishful thinking, like, oh, everything's going to be okay. Pollyanna, I believe in the Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. The government will take care of me. They'll come in and they'll make sure that those generators work, because then nobody wants a nuclear power plant to melt down, do they? So they just believe in the good fairy, that it's all going to be okay. But the truth is, bad stuff happens.
Let me go one further. I tell Austinites that there are 2 reactors. One of them is one of the biggest research reactors in the world at the University of Texas in North Austin. And grown adults laugh at me and say, no, there isn't. I would have heard of it. They could, in 30 seconds, pull up on the University of Texas admitting it. In fact, guys, type in University of Texas nuclear experimental reactor. But adults won't even admit it's there because they might have to think about a threat. I mean, this is a new level of denial.
It is a big level of denial. And the fact that we can solve the worst problem, the end of the world as we know it, for the price of a single stealth bomber. I mean, that's just a crime. If they look at what happened. New Orleans. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said for 50 years that these levees were outdated and they weren't adequate, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. And it's not a question of if New Orleans will get hit by a hurricane, but when. And what happened? They even appropriated money for rebuilding the levees, but they got spent somewhere else. So they just dicked around and just ignored and said, well, they ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, it's okay, everything will be all right. And we lost most of New Orleans. Well, now we're talking about losing the world as we know it. We're talking about perhaps the extinction of all human beings on the planet for something that can be solved, prevented for the price of a single stealth bomber. I mean, it's criminal. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this article. I mean, I've been talking to the world's top scientists on this. Nuclear scientists, EMP scientists, military guys, people who know about this stuff. The guy, John Kappenman, who wrote the giant report from Meditech on geomagnetic influences, storms, and the effect on the U.S. grid. I've been talking hours on these phones with these guys, and they've been begging me to write this article and to get on your show and to get on all these shows. And they're saying, you know, Matt, we've been singing this song for a long time, and they agree 100% with me about the 400 Chernobyls. They agree. And they're saying, Matt, you got to get it out to the public because we've been singing it, but, you know, we're scientists and we're engineers, and we don't get on public radio, and, you know, we don't write these articles like you do for the common man. You know, we write technical journals articles. So that they've been begging me to get on your shows like yours and get this out to the public because we can solve this problem. We can do it.
Well, I'm glad I saw your report. I'm glad we linked to it at Infowars.com because you are not putting a exaggerated spin on this. I mean, the only sane response to this is to have a debate and a discussion. But every movie I rent, everywhere I go, it's just terrorists are going to kill you. Terrorists are going to kill you. Give up your rights. And obviously, it's an excuse to take our liberties, whether the terrorists are real or not. But meanwhile, this system is just so hubris-filled that they just think it can't happen here. And I have top genetic engineers on, you name it. I've got the government's own reports where the GMO within 3 generations is sterilizing all the guinea pigs and rats. And they're just letting us eat it. And we see our health problems exploding. I mean, it's on every front. It's like humans have been given all this technology and we're still acting like apes or something with it and just killing each other.
You know, Europe said no. They looked at the data and said, wait a minute, we're not going to take your GMO. They said no. And in this country, Monsanto had their hands in the pockets of both the Republicans and the Democrats. They got their hands in the government, and they got it run right through. There's no drug in the world that would get approved if it had data like the data on GMO. I mean, and this is something where there's people running for profit, and they just don't give a damn about the health of the world and the future of the world and the people. It's like profit and greed is number one. And I, you know.
But what does it profit you if you make $2 billion and then your grandkids die of cancer?
Short-term profit. You've made the money now, you live the life now, and, well, your grandkids, you know, that's somebody else's problem. I don't understand it. I mean, it's not me. I mean, I wrote my book, When Technology Fails, and I borrowed on my house, and I, you know, got all the equity in my home and 3 years of my life in that, and more, and did When Disaster Strikes. And I wrote these books to help people cope with these coming times of change and disaster in our world, where you've got to be more self-reliant, you've got to be prepared, you've got to take your own health in your own hands because the government is not watching out for you. And if you're going to wait and rely on the doctors to provide you with antibiotics when there's the next antibiotic superbug coming along, you're in trouble. So I wrote these books to help people.
No, they're incredible.
Times of change.
I've read one of them. I'm going to read the other, and I'm going to try to carry them at Infowars.com. They're powerful. We got 2 short segments left. We're going to go right to calls and questions. But I got to tell you, Mr. Stein, I look forward to having you back up for a full 2-hour interview in the near future so we can go over everything you're covering in these books. It's just amazing information. We're trying to save lives here, trying to save our planet, trying to save our future. This is big deal. We'll be right back. It's exactly what our design engineer from MIT is telling us, best-selling author Matthew Stein. You look at the data, and the data is GMO is killing us already. And within 3 generations, that's every 20 years, to get up to breeding capacity, on average, devastation. Serious problems in every mammal species they've tested it on, but they don't test it on humans. I want to go to some of your calls here. But then you look at the reactors and the solar flares, and you look at everything else the system's doing. It really is just a bunch of crooks snatching and grabbing everything and then thinking a police state's going to protect them. And we see this kind of megalomania with Hitler. We saw it with Nero. We saw it with the Aztecs. And by the time a couple hundred Spanish showed up and defeated tens of thousands of Aztecs, it was because the society had already collapsed. But now it's a collapsed society with crazy leaders running things who've got nuclear weapons. And all of this, it's just insane. And I look forward to having our guest on for a full 2 hours soon. Let's go to Mark in New York. You're on with our guest. Go ahead, Mark.
Hello, Alex. Southwestern New York calling. Chuck Harder, I'm sure you're familiar with the name, is up on this and is trying to develop a system that would possibly help the average homeowner deal with anything but an E3 level pulse. He was on with Joyce Riley a few months ago talking about this EMP that's slated for about a year from now.
Well, let me ask our guest that question. Can they predict when an EMP is going to hit, generally?
No, but they do know that we have a solar maximum. It's every 11 years the sun's poles flip, and that's when it burps the most. But even in a solar minimum, a giant storm, a big burp from the sun could happen. A big CME could launch towards the planet just as bad as 1921. So it's really kind of a crap shot and a roll of a die. What they do know is that it looks like we're quite active in this period heading up to the next solar maximum. So there's a decent chance. Now, if we're lucky, we'll get a blow like South Africa 2003 that fried 14 transformers, and it'll be enough to screw things up and really scare people enough to really fix the problem. If we're unlucky, we get a 1921 or an 1859 or even worse kind of storm, and it's game over, at least for society is in the world as we know it.
Caller, what was your other quick question?
Silicon chips versus transistors. I wanted to mention that the silicon IC chip obviously is affected, but the transistor, that's carbon, right? Is that correct?
No, transistor is silicon. It actually turns out, now here's the thing. In a solar storm, you don't have the short-term super fast nanosecond effect that fries chips. You have the long slow burn, which is called the E3. The E1 is like an EMP effect from a nuke going off, and the E1 is what fries chips. Now, it turns out that all of the chips made, most of the chips made in the last 5 years to the EU standard have built-in electrostatic protection. And so most of those will survive the E1. So the latest electronics. But what's the bigger concern? See, people say, am I more concerned about a terrorist EMP attack or a solar storm? I'm much more concerned about the solar storm than the EMP attack. EMP attack is bad. It could collapse the country. It could collapse the stock market. And it would probably shut down Washington, D.C. for a long period of time. But at least the rest of the world would still be there to come in and fix. And maybe some nukes would go off because of the EMP, primarily probably in the East Coast, because that'd be the primary target. But it wouldn't be a 400 Chernobyls end of the world as we know it's seen. But the solar storm, you're talking most of the world's grid cooked, most of the world's 442 reactors melting down.
And the storm is a slow cook, right? Because it just keeps coming in, heating things up, right?
Cook. So the same E3 of an EMP is like a solar storm, only it's over most of the planet instead of a 1,500-mile circle or a 500-mile circle for a small...
Wow. Stay there. Quick questions back in 1 minute. All right, we only got 5 minutes. We're going to have our guests back, but I want to just get a quick question from each caller. So be ready. Throw it out. We'll get a quick answer because I want to hear from everybody. Rob in Illinois, you're on the air with our guest. Go ahead.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your info.
Go ahead.
I live in Rockford outside of Byron, Illinois, and we just kind of had a little incident with our nuclear plant. I was just wondering what the public could do, some of the simpler things that we could do to prepare in case there is havoc.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, every week it's Illinois, it's California, and radiation alerts, and they release it, and they say, don't worry about it. So, I mean, what do you do to prepare? I would try to not live close to one, but they've got so many. Your comments on that, Mr. Stein?
Okay, I can't go detailed into the strategies, but in the last chapter of my book is called When Disaster Strikes. The last chapter is The Unthinkable, Surviving a Nuclear Catastrophe. There's 3 separate strategies, depending on if it's a nuclear plant meltdown, a dirty bomb, or an actual nuclear bomb going off. Somebody launched a bomb at us. Different strategies. But the thing you want to do right now is I take modafillin every day, which is a seaweed extract that chelates to heavy metals. It's mercuries, leads, and also radioactive heavy metals. So I'm just probably going to take that the rest of my life, provided I have access to it.
Because there's already so much heavy metal in the environment, you need it anyways.
Well, and the radioactivity comes to you in heavy metal, and it's concentrated in the food chain. When you eat eggs and milk and meat products, you know, they're every time you go up a level in the food chain, it's more concentrated. So you want to start purging that stuff from your body so you don't end up with the Chernobyl necklace in 20 years where you got thyroid cancer, or you get some plutonium lodged in your lung and you got lung cancer. So that, I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely. Great point. I totally agree with that. I've started the seaweed for the last year. Really giving me a lot of energy. Let's go to Ben in Indiana. Ben, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Thanks, guys. I was basically going to ask the same types of questions. What can we do to, one, prepare our home? And obviously, I understand taking the seaweed.
I think the big thing is warn people politically so that we can force movement by corporations and government for self-preservation. I think that's what Ben's, the last, or this caller was bringing up, Mr. Stein.
Yeah. You want to work on your personal level, your preparedness, your ability to understand the situation when it's chaotic, to figure out what's going on so you can do the right strategy, to have the materials on hand ahead of time for your self-reliance. You want to work on a community level, the transition community, transition town, which is towns to become more resilient and more self-reliant so they can deal with changes in energy
production. And that's happening everywhere, and a lot of highly educated people have been moving to the countryside, and you find these communities all over the place. Pappy in Illinois, quick question for our guest. Go ahead, Pappy.
I want to stay mobile. How do I make my garage a Faraday cage? Go.
Well, you don't need a lot of metal to be a Faraday cage. But the thing is that the EMP tests show, unless it's a super optimized, like super EMP weapon, if your car's not running at the time of an EMP, meaning it's in your garage, chances are 99 out of 100 it's going to be fine. The problem is the grid's going to collapse, not that your car's not going to work. Now, if you want to be really sure about EMPs, you can take garbage cans and throw electronic devices in garbage cans. And if you want to be really sure, you do a double Faraday cage where you take your device, put a garbage bag around it, wrap it in aluminum foil, put another garbage bag around it, and then stuff some of those in a galvanized garbage can. And that will be...
But everybody, again, is worried about themselves personally. The grid, folks, is what is super long wires and is what's going to pick up and intensify this, and that's where you're going to have the problem.
And it's not just the grid. It's any digital control system that runs all of our factories, pollution plants, power plants, refineries, everything. They have massive runs of Ethernet wire that connects all the devices together. That stuff cooks in an EMP. Most of your personal electronics in your home, turns out, will be okay.
It's the infrastructure
that's the problem.
It's the infrastructure. Great job, sir. Look forward to having you back soon. Another powerful guest coming up. If you believe in this information and want to support its viral spread, go to the InfoWars store at InfoWars.com. We've got the new G.I. Joe InfoWars t-shirts. We've got the incredible Pro Pure gravity-fed filters available at InfoWars.com in the store. We've got a new DVD, Scientists Under Attack, the Don't Tread on Me flag. We've got all sorts of different bumper stickers to help spread the rebellion virally. It's all there, wristbands, citizen rule books in every order. Order online at Infowars.com today. The water filters, the canteens, it's all there. Infowars.com.